Hey gang, this is not like a usual lecture, but I'm happy to be here with all of you and glad that you were willing and able to join the game camp at Indiana University this summer of 2020. My name is Norbert Herber. I'm a faculty member at the Media School at Indiana University. My teaching and research deals with music and sound for games, playable media, film, and technologically charged public spaces. My talk today is going to focus on game audio, and we really don't have time to get into all the nooks and crannies of game audio, but I want to at least give you an idea of who's involved, what kinds of work do they do, how do they do it, what tools do they use, what are some of the concerns that they have, and give you an idea of the, overall the bigger picture of what's happening in the world of game audio. So, composers. When we think of composers, we think of someone with this serious face, just like Mr. Beethoven. And some composers may be that way, but game composers, no, not so much. Game composers are more like this guy, Dr. Frankenstein. They're very smart, they're a little bit crazy, they have a great sense of humor, and they are incredibly passionate about what they do. I think this is a much better picture of what a game composer is actually like. And game composers, especially today, have to wear lots of different hats. Depending upon the kind of work that they're doing and the sorts of games that they're hired to compose for, they might be working with an orchestra and writing out parts for a big group of musicians and doing something like what you see in the image on the left. They can also be in their studio like I am today, dealing with software and different kinds of electronic instruments and software synths and samplers and all of that. The sound palette for contemporary composers is absolutely massive, and game audio composers generally have a pretty good handle on all of that and then float from one to the next depending upon what their current project may call for. Game audio world is also full of sound designers. Here is an image of Christy Knupp. She is working in the studio with what looks like a vat of some sort of gel. You can see there's a big shotgun microphone pointed at her hands, and my guess is that she's making, squelchy, kind of gross sounds for, mucky footsteps or viscera being torn from a body. There's a lot of different things that you could do with the sound of mushing gel around like that, but that's what sound designers do. They make weird sounds in the studio, they record everything, edit it, process it, transform it into something that then we hear in a game or any other sort of program that we're watching or playing. In addition to sound designers, the game audio world is unique in that it has technical sound designers. And it's probably easiest to describe them as someone who does equal parts sound design work and coding. They spend a lot of time working in the game engine or working with tools that talk to the game engine, and that includes a lot of work with middleware. Now, that may be a new term for most of you today. Middleware is the name that's used for a piece of software that sits between a digital audio application like Pro Tools or Logic and the game engine itself, Unity, Unreal, whatever engine might be used. Middleware allows those two pieces of software to talk to each other to a certain extent, and some current middleware applications that we'll take a closer look at later on include Fmod, Wise, Fabric, Elias, and then Max MSP and Pure Data. Not really middleware, but it's something that technical sound designers spend a fair amount of time working in because they oftentimes need to do a lot of prototyping. And by prototyping, I mean working on something like this. This is a screenshot of an equalizer that was built in Max MSP. Max is a graphic programming language, so you have little rectangular objects like this that perform a particular function. You can have little controllers like this that provide some sort of interface. And all of these objects are linked together with these patch cables that lets the audio signal or data signals transfer from one object to the next, and in this case, shape a sound and control how it might be filtered. It's much faster, it's much easier, it's much less expensive for technical sound designers to do their prototyping in a system like this, but because they can throw something together quickly, test it out, hear how it sounds. If they like it, they can invest the time and money in working on it further. If for whatever reason it doesn't work out, they haven't spent a lot of time on something that's not going to come to fruition, and they can just, delete it and move on to something else that might provide a better solution. So prototyping tools like this are a big part of what they do, and Max or Pure Data are some of the best environments in which to do that work. And then another member of the audio team that doesn't always get a lot of the glory, but is crucially important, is the audio director. This is the person who keeps all the trains running on time, makes sure that the sound designers and programmers sound designers and composers have all the information that they need. They can dialogue with the larger design team. They can talk, get deep into the trenches with the composers and the sound designers, and provide a bridge between those two groups who don't always necessarily speak the same language. Audio directors are absolutely crucial for keeping everybody on the same page. The tools that they get to use aren't quite as sexy as what composers and sound designers use, but things like Basecamp and Trello and Asana and Jira, absolutely crucial for keeping a project moving forward, especially with a large team. And that's what the audio directors are there to do. So there's 3 different videos that you can see in the comments below, and take some time to check out on your own. It just won't fit into the time that Rush asked me to fill with this talk today, but it's something that I think will be of interest to you because each presents 3 really different ways that game audio work can be done. This first video is from a small sound and music shop in Berkeley, California called Wabi Sabi Sound. They have a small team that does everything, and they contract with small game development studios to work on projects or different aspects of individual projects. So they present something that kind of fits into the middle in terms of size or scope of the games that are being developed and the work that's being done. The next person is Gary Scheiman. Gary is well known for composing music for the BioShock series, Dante's Inferno, and that's exactly what this video is. It has some clips of him conducting a small orchestra at Abbey Road Studios in London for Dante's Inferno. And this is just a quick take of a bit of that recording session and some feedback that he gives to the orchestra in the studio. Dante's Inferno and BioShock, huge AAA titles, hours of music that went into this, so it's a huge job for Gary and his team to put all of this together. But they have a system for getting it done and working with a live orchestra to record everything at the highest possible quality with great performances by world-class musicians. And this video will give you a glimpse into how he works. Then, at the opposite end of the spectrum, I have this really in-depth video by Rich Vreeland, also known as Disasterpiece. In this video, he talks about his process for developing the soundtrack to the game Fez. And what I think is really great about this is that Rich works primarily on his own. And he talks in this video about taking a really, really deep dive into a software synthesizer called Massive and how he plumbed the depths of that instrument, found all the nooks and crannies, and really, really learned how to make great sounds that fit within the world that he was creating for Fez. And I think his take on the approach for that music is just as valid as all of the others, but completely different because he's working mostly on his own and is, really just meditating with this one piece of software and trying to get all of the sounds and expression that he possibly can out of it for that game world. So on your own, take a minute. You can find those links in the comments below and watch through them. Some are longer than others, but it's all really, really great material. So everything we covered so far is a lot about who is involved in doing this work. And I'd like to transition now and focus more on the how. What tools are used? What are some of the concerns that these sound designers and composers have running through their mind while they're working on a game soundtrack? And there's a lot of different ways that we could tackle something like this. But I kind of think that one helpful way is to approach it through the contrast of, this is what I wanted to show you, media assets, hard-coded audio files versus procedural generation. Game assets that are generated on the fly or made fresh through some procedural or algorithmic process as the game is played. So we'll start with assets. And this image shows FMOD. That's the big gray rectangle that you see in that interface with a bunch of dials. It looks a bit like an audio workstation. That is FMOD, and that blue rectangle that you see right here is an audio file. You can see that this is an unlock sound event, and in order to make this work, there is a sound of unlocking that's right there. This is probably an AIF or a WAV file, which means that it's a uncompressed format. So this is the highest possible quality of a digital audio file. And a lot of game audio, both music and sound design, is done by dropping uncompressed audio files into an interface like what you see here with FMOD, and using the tools in FMOD to determine how it plays, how it might change over time, and a huge number of other parameters that tie into the game in meaningful ways. The names that you see below, MP3, OGG, AAC, PCM, FLAC, you may be familiar with some of these terms. These are other digital audio file formats, but those are all the compressed formats. So they are ones where the file size has been shrunken considerably, but oftentimes that means at the loss of some degree of quality. And it's something that sound designers and composers have to balance out. How much are they willing to give up in the way of file size and the amount of storage that's required for the game audio, but still preserve a certain degree of quality so that everything sounds as best it can and sounds appropriate for the game itself. FMOD-wise, all the other middleware tools that we talked about allow composers to work in this space and manage their files accordingly to the demands of the game and other technical constraints that they might have. And that's a big part of the process, thinking through what you can and can't do technically and trying to bend the rules as much as is possible in order to get the best sounding game soundtrack given what limitations you might have. So this next image shows FMOD again, but this is a more complex setup. This is actually a piece of procedural music, and the details aren't really relevant to what we're talking about right now, but you can see, there's more WAV or AIF files dropped into those rectangles. You can see that there's a bunch of others here that are configured differently. Some have randomization, some have their own little internal sequence that's written into it. You can also see that there's 4 separate compartments here. Each of those kind of represents a different section of this music. These white markers, these green markers, serve as logic transitions. So depending upon what's happening in the game, the playback will be diverted from one section to the next and back and to the third and back to the second and then over to the fourth. It changes however the player's play session dictates. The music should change or shift. And this is really one of the most powerful things about FMOD and other middleware applications, is that you can take a chunk of music that you've composed, break it into its individual parts, and then mix and match and resequence and combine them in different ways in order to allow that game soundtrack to be fresh and new every time a player plays, And that's always going to happen in response to what they do in the game. And that's where middleware comes into, that's why middleware has such a huge role to play, because it means that none of that logic has to be written in code from the ground up by a composer or sound designer who may not have the technical acumen to do that, or a programmer who's busy with a billion other things and doesn't necessarily have the time to do all of that. Middleware really kind of creates this common ground that allows each party to contribute just enough in order to get a really responsive game audio solution without either party, the sound designer, composer on one side, or the programmers on the other, having to interfere too much with the work that their colleague is doing. So I mentioned that this is procedural music, and that's something that has been around in games for a long time and is in games that you probably play right now. A great example of that is No Man's Sky. And I know the game itself has critics, shall we say. But regardless of what you think of the game itself, it's a great case for why something like procedural audio matters. No Man's Sky claims that it has 18 quintillionth worlds because it's a procedurally generated universe. So you get in your spaceship, you go out and you explore, and you're going to find flora and fauna and planets that you have never seen and may have never imagined before. If a composer were going to try to write music for that and score that entire thing, we're talking thousands and thousands of hours of music, which is just completely untenable. There are not enough hard drives in the world to hold that much music. So something that is procedurally generated, where the music can be made afresh every moment through some algorithmic process, really makes sense for games like No Man's Sky. And that's what Paul Weir and 65 Days of Static did. 65 Days of Static made an album. They wrote a bunch of songs. They basically did what they do as a band. Paul Weir sat down with all of that raw recorded material and then started to, I think the best term to use is remix it, to think about how you could take that raw material, shape it in different ways, change it, reorder it, basically just experiment with it as much as he possibly could to see all of the new songs and new material that he could get out of some of the fixed material that the band put together in the studio. And so that's what you hear when you play No Man's Sky. And because it's mixing and matching from across disparate tracks and disparate recording sessions, you're going to hear something that's really unique every time you enter a new world. Excuse me. As I mentioned earlier, though, procedural sound is not something that is entirely new. In fact, it was the way that game audio was first done. In the very earliest digital games, there was no middleware. There were little chips like this. This Texas Instruments chips, the SN76489, is sort of iconic because it showed up in a lot of early console games and had kind of iconic sound. As George the Fat Man Sanger says, with 3 square oscillators and a white noise generator, it had 2 boops, a beep, and a psht. And you'll understand a little bit more about that with the exercise that you'll do later today. But you can think about this little chip as a tiny synthesizer. The game would send commands to it, tell it what sounds to play, what parameters to use to shape that sound, and it would make all of the audio that was needed for weapons firing and characters moving about the game world, enemies attacking, everything you can imagine. Those little oscillators were responsible for making all of those sounds. And all of that was procedurally generated, meaning computer code sent instructions to that chip and told it how to play the sound, and also potentially how to vary it and how to make it different or a little bit different every single time it played so that the sounds didn't become static or too repetitive. So linked to that and some of the work that you're going to do later today, we have Tom Vine. And I think rather than give any kind of introduction, I'm just gonna switch over to this video and let Tom tell you himself about some work that he's done.
I'm Tom Ryan, and this is Bleep, Bloop, Fizzle, Zap. After making games for a number of years, one of the problems I always find is getting my hands on good quality sound effects that are right for the job. Luckily, the amazing Thomas Peterson has put together an app to allow me to generate my own, SFXer. Using the same kind of oscillators and effects found in 16-bit games consoles, I'm just a few clicks away from exactly the sounds I need. Sadly, 3 of those clicks are downloading, scanning, and running the exe file. Always looking to optimize my workflow, I thought how nice it would be if someone could port it to Flash so I could run it straight out of my browser. So I did. And here it is, AS3 SFXer. Let's take a look, shall we? Generator buttons down the left generate familiar but randomized sound effects perfect for basic gaming needs. The oscillator settings across the top choose exactly what type of sound to generate. Attack, sustain, and decay control the volume envelope. Frequency sets the pitch of the sound. Vibrato gives a classic wobble feel. Change can shift the pitch mid-sound. Square duty changes the way the square wave sounds. Repeat speed can set if and how often the setting should be reset during the sound. Phaser applies a phaser effect. The low-pass filter only allows lower frequencies through. And the high-pass filter only allows higher frequencies through. You can then say WAVs straight out of AS3 SFXer and then import them back into Flash or any game development software. But the web app is only one half of AS3 SFXer. By grabbing the source code, it's open source, you can use AS3 SFXer to generate sounds at runtime in your games. Let's look at how with an example. So, here's John Davey. He looks a little bit parched. Ah, beer. But it's all a little bit quiet, which isn't like John at all. So, we can grab a sound we want out of the app, we can copy the settings straight from the app and paste it into our code, which looks as simple as this. There it is with the settings. We're then going to cache the sound so that it only has to play back the generated sound later. Much better. AS3 SFXer can also generate mutated sounds so that it sounds slightly different each time at runtime. I've been Tom Vine. Thanks very much.
So in that video, he talked about his first application, AS3 SFXer. AS3 stands for ActionScript 3. That's the scripting language that he wrote that engine in. It's tied to software known as Flash, which you are probably familiar with, although it's definitely waning on the web, especially since it will be officially discontinued in December of this year. So Tom's application isn't going to live on for too much longer, but it's still out there because Flash is still supported. And there is a great application that you'll use in your lesson today called Chiptone. The URL is right there. It'll be in the comments, and you'll see it later today as well. Chiptone is a software synthesizer. It's built on the same engine as AS3 SFXer, but it has a much more intuitive and helpful UI that makes the sound synthesis process easier than the first version that he showed in that video. Well, I have one last thing to show you, and that is this video, which I'm just going to let play, but I'm going to pull the volume all the way down. So this is a promotional video for the Game Audio Network Guild, or Audio Gang. And I'm sharing this with you because there's a chance that some of you might be interested in pursuing game audio more in the future. And this group is without a doubt one of the most supportive and inclusive groups that I have ever known in my life. It was started by a group of game audio professionals who had successful careers and really wanted to give back and help young composers and sound designers and audio directors get a start on their careers. So Gang is set up for people like you, students who are interested in games, interested in audio engineering, music, anything related to game audio, and will help them get their career going by pairing you with composers or sound designers in the industry, by hosting talks that are relevant to the work that's going on in the game audio world, sponsoring award shows and competitions, demo derbies at the Game Developers Conference every spring. Gang does so much to help the community, and I strongly encourage any of you who are interested in game audio to take a closer look at Gang, to look into joining the group with a student membership, which isn't terribly expensive, because you can take advantage of everything that they're offering right now and really get an early perspective into what's happening in this industry, the people who are there, what kind of work they're doing, how they ended up with the jobs that they have, and what it takes ultimately to get there. So I hope that this is a helpful path for some of you to follow if this is the kind of work that you think you might be interested in pursuing more substantially in the future. Thank you so much for your time. I hope you've had a great week at Game Camp this year, and I hope I can meet you in person sometime. Thanks, everybody. Bye.